It is now 6:30, and today is Monday, June the 2nd, 2025, and I would like to call to order this meeting of the 2025 Bond Committee. Thank everyone for coming. Okay, so that's the first item on our agenda. Second item on our agenda is to receive public comments. To submit a comment via email, following information is required. Submit a comment by 4 p.m. on Monday, June 2nd, 2025. Email sophialewis@nucleotexas.gov. Email title, Public Comment 2025 Bond Committee, Monday, June 2nd, 2025. Please include your first name, last name, and address for the record. Do we have any comments of that nature? Okay, very good. We have no public comments. So the third item on the agenda is A, consider the meetings for the May 8th, 2025 and the May 15th, 2025 Bond Committee meeting. Those were emailed to us several days ago. So, are there any questions, comments, or concerns about the minutes as I just stated? If there are none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved to approve the May 8th and May 15th.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Is there a second?
Second.
It's seconded by Dr. Sass. So, all of those opposed, all of those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that is unanimous. Okay, the next item on the agenda is B, financial review, discussion, preparation, and draft report. And for this portion of the meeting, I will turn it over to the city manager to lead us as he feels fit.
Well, thank you, Chairman Harvey, and I just want to take a minute and thank the entire bond committee. You guys have spent so much time with us, touring buildings and facilities, and over these last, what has it been, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it's been. Seems like it's been
shorter, but it's felt like.
Has it been shorter?
Well, I share that feeling.
Each time it's like, whew, we keep asking a lot of them, but thank you for everything that you guys have put into it. So I thought what it would do to kind of help the process along tonight is put together a PowerPoint presentation. There's printed copies in front of you. There's a few extra at the end of the table. I'm going to go through it here on the screen and just kind of walk through it. But I kind of want to start kind of from the beginning. Want to review some of the projects with you that you've gone out and looked at, some tours of some of the things, talk about some costs, talk about some strategies, and kind of get your input on a whole variety of different things. So, and I'll stand up here just so I can keep advancing the slides. So, how we got here. So, the council created for us the bond committee, and you all graciously volunteered your time. And as you know, the committee has been meeting regularly to really evaluate the potential projects, develop some recommendations, which is really kind of now we're at that point where we're rolling up our sleeves. Right now we're really digging into the meat and the potatoes of it. These meetings have all been open to the public. I know you've had guests throughout the process, some more than other times during the process as we did different tours. We'll talk about the projects, we'll talk about financial implications as we go. I know we've talked about that in some of the previous meetings, but we'll kind of do a recap. So, we are charged by the resolution that created the bond committee with making a report of its findings to council by July of 25. So just as a reminder, the composition of the committee is one council member, each council member, nominated one individual, and there's a representative of Planning and Zoning Commission and a representative of the DCEDC. So that constitutes the 9 voting members, which everybody is here tonight except for Mr. Zilka. So thank you all. And I know he was traveling tonight and just not able to join us this evening. So here's the timeline that we're kind of working on. So It was back in January when the bond committee was actually considered and then created. The bond committee, there's a little discrepancy here. I have to check the exact date, but I think it's gonna be difficult for us to make the June, it says June 25 bond committee make recommendation. As long as we do it in the month of July, we'll be okay. I think that's per the resolution. Because ultimately, if you recommend, and that's a big if you recommend to city council to move forward with a bond, they have to actually pass a order by August 18th for it to appear on this year's ballot. If they don't do that before that date, then it will not appear on the November 4th, 2025 election day ballot. If we do a bond and if it passes, then we'd be looking at breaking ground on some of these projects in early 26 with a pretty aggressive plan for opening some of those facilities in 27. Again, those are big ifs. The resolution 2025-421 that established the bond committee and the specific purpose and charge, and I know Ms. Browning is this is on page 8, has brought this up a couple of different times, but she's absolutely right, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Question number 1, should the city council call for a bond election? That's one of the recommendations we're looking for from you. Number 2, should a portion of the bond capacity be dedicated to infrastructure, facilities, health, and safety? If so, how much? 3, consider the amount of bonding capacity available and the potential impact of the city tax rate. 4, consider recommendations of the comprehensive plan, other planning documents, and then what other needs should be considered. So we'll kind of break through these one at a time as we go through. So this is just a little bit more that was actually in the staff report of that original resolution when we took that to city council in terms of the specifics of all 5 of those. We'll go back to that if needed. So I think from the very beginning, we've talked about 3 things, but there's more than that. We've talked about a police facility, we've talked about a fire station, we've talked about service center, but there's definitely more to that. And so what I'd like to do is kind of go through the projects, kind of what we've evaluated, what we've looked at, what we've went through one at a time. I also certainly want to reference the capital improvement plan. When we started this project, the city council had not yet adopted the capital improvement plan, but they have since adopted that. That really identifies priorities over the next 15 years for the city, the investment priorities. The short-term bucket has about $39 million in short-term immediate investments that would be looking to be completed between 25 and 27, 23 million for the medium term and 53 million for the long term. So first of all, let me say, don't worry. We're not asking you to figure out this $100 million in projects. There's any number of revenue sources that we're looking at on these. I'll give you a perfect example. The automated metering infrastructure, the AMI, right? Shahad is here with us, our Assistant Public Works Director tonight. Shahad has been working very closely with the Texas Water Development Board, and we're very hopeful that we'll have a grant for at least half of the cost of that project, hopefully a little bit more. But so that's not necessarily something that we've really even talked about as part of this bond project. So we don't have to worry about all of those particular improvements. But I did try to make a list, and this list is on page 14 of that PowerPoint presentation, of the facilities that you visited or that we've talked about over the last couple of months. We did a tour of the police, and we talked about public safety building. And I've estimated kind of a low-end, high-end range for each of these for you. But you're probably on the low end talking about $8 million for a public safety building, $12 million on the high end. Service center, $10 to $12 million. Fire station number 2, we toured that. We talked about improvements needed at fire station 2. Numbers could be a little bit off here. I did try to estimate based on a 2027 construction, but that's, especially given the cost of tariffs and steel and everything else, you might as well throw a dart at a dartboard, but to be honest with you, but I'm trying to factor that in here a little bit for 500 to $1 million in improvements for station 2. Fire station number 3, this is not a full, I've said it before, but I just want to repeat, this is not a big, another new fire station 1. This would be more like a substation, is what we've talked about. You're probably a little bit lighter on the 1.5, 3.5 million. We'll talk a little bit more about these in one at a time. The rec center, you toured that. Dog park, we visited that property. The Ladd Nature Preserve, I know we talked about it, we drove past it, but that's, you know, there's some different funding mechanisms and strategies relative to that we'll get into a little bit later here. The field house, I know that they talked about the last meeting that I missed because I was at my daughter's graduation, but some improvements there. The library, we did a tour of the library if we were to build a new library. And then some general improvements, IT, general stuff. So on the low end, 44 million, on the high end, 68 million. We cannot afford a bond for that. I don't think any of the taxpayers would be happy with us if we recommended a bond for that whole thing, to be quite honest. So we have to get very strategic on how we look at it. So I just want to show you some concepts here on some of the different things that we've looked at, that we've talked about as we've gone through this process. We've talked about the police facility or the public safety building. There was option A, which called for a new building out a little closer to Wheatland, and then maybe showing that either as a 2-story or a 3-story building. View number 2 of that same option. Option B showed that new police facility going out a little bit more into the parking lot, wrapping a new parking lot, preserving the trees. That was the one thing. Let me flip back here for a second. There was a big difference here. This building would take out some of the older trees that were out in the front. So what they came back to us with was a proposal that would actually extend the building out into the parking lot a little bit more, add additional parking out closer to the road in the front, and then preserving some of those trees out front. They also show this option with a Heroes Park connection out to the old Rose Garden in Armstrong Park. Here would be the view 1 from front towards Wheatland. View 2 from the parking lot for option B. View 3 overnight. And then if that were to be constructed, what the entire campus would look like. So here's City Hall here, here's the existing police here, and then that new building there. So just any questions in general about this before, I'll get into numbers here in a few minutes, but any questions about the renderings or anything before we move on the police? No? Okay. We've got some concepts now for what the service center could look like. A lot of the evaluation that we've done kind of comes back to really breaking apart the building a separate administration building from what I would call the barn or the garage area. And there's a number of different factors that come into play for that. Number one, we've got staff really at capacity, as you saw when you toured the service center currently. And by building the new separate administration building first, would allow them to move into that building from a phasing perspective, get situated in there, and then we could come back and do the barn. The other thing that we really were looking at as part of this overall concept is Duncanville 2040, Duncanville 2080, what that would look like if there was ever a need to expand. Not doing it now, but just to give room in the future. And laying this out in a manner, you've got the creek that runs here, you've got the creek that runs back here. So laying it out in a manner so that it could be added onto. This would be a steel frame construction building. And so you would literally just add on the steel if needed, especially on what I would call the barn or the storage area. This would be the internal inside storage. A lot of the pieces of equipment and everything would all go in this area here. I think we have a couple of more renderings. The goal would be to put, there's a list here, so I'm gonna read the list, but the goal would be to put Parks and Rec, Public Works, Equipment Services, Streets, Traffic, and the Water Department all in this building. So that means they would then vacate the old Fire Station 1 up on Camp Wisdom so that we could repurpose that building and put everybody right here together so that they could work collaboratively. The barn, as I'm referring to it, would be a one-way in, one-way out. You pull in, the vehicles could then pull in and park. You just back and then go out. This was specifically designed so that we stayed back from the neighbors, so that we really weren't building closer to the property line on that would be the east side, to keep the same separation difference as it currently is. And then these would be the mechanic bays back in here where vehicles are pulled in to actually work on them.
I'm
Yes.
just curious, I'm trying to look back on page 25 to see where neighbors actually are.
They're on the other side of the creek. They're like right, you can actually see some of the backyards just barely there. So it was really trying right on the other side of the creek. So it's really not going further that way. Instead, that future expansion would come back the other way. Some renderings of what it would look like on page 28. Again, these are just concept drawings, but just to give you some ideas of what the outsides of the building would look like. And then overall, this is also some, what I would say, some artistic rendering liberty that they took here with the way they laid this all out. But this is the main entrance coming in. This would be Daniel Dale up here. So you come in Daniel Dale, and then there would be a parking here for the administration portion of the building. And then you keep driving further back, and then this is where the barn would be, where the vehicles and the equipment would be stored, and the fuel pumps would be back here.
This involves complete demolition of the existing.
No, it actually, we actually talked about that, and really the only part that would have to be demoed is really the current administration portion. They would reuse as much as they could.
What's the nearest cross street on Daniel Dale?
67 to the east, and then it would be Main Street to the west. Good questions, good questions. The fire station, we went up and took a tour of the new fire station. Obviously, it's a beautiful facility. It has the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, and everything in it. Everybody took a tour of that. It's an absolutely beautiful facility. What the matrix report that we talked about previously referenced was the response time, right, in the southwest portion of the city. So what you'd be talking about is Wheatland Road south to the city line west of Santa Fe. So that southwest quadrant, that's really what the matrix analysis, the independent consultant said. Those were the areas where we struggled to meet the response times that we really should be striving to hit. And that's why they recommended the third station there. For comparison, this station, and we talked about this previously, I want to say give or take $10 million ended up being the final number. I know originally it was planned for less than that, but some costs kind of crept up. Just for comparison, I just also wanted to show you, there was a substation recently built by, and this is what we would call a substation by Siegelville. I know it's maybe a little bit smaller. We have to do some different adjustments, but that building was built about 4 years ago, and it's my understanding it was about 1.5 million. So a much smaller facility. Have probably an ambulance and an engine, and I think they keep a brush truck in it, just something relatively small.
I do have one question about the location. I know that you're kind of eyeing the area near Rotary Park there, you know, where the dog park is supposed to be.
Oh, yes, west side of Santa Fe.
Right.
Any place west side of Santa Fe. Yep.
Okay. You said that the target area is south of Wheatland, and yet that's like on Wheatland. Is there any location within that quadrant that it could, you know, kind of a hub that it could get to all areas of it quicker?
So that's the only piece of property the city currently owns
Okay.
that would not involve land acquisition cost to associated with it. There are other parcels, there are some other vacant parcels, there's some plazas, there's some other things that we could look at if we did move forward with that route, that we could really look at. So I think what the report actually said, and I keep saying Wheatland, it actually identified the intersection of Wheatland, is that Cedar Ridge?
Cedar Ridge.
Yeah, so it identified Wheatland, Cedar Ridge area southwest of Santa Fe, and then obviously to the city borders and stuff. So there's a lot of, that's a big area. There's a lot of different parcels in there, and maybe there's some other opportunities, but that is the only current piece that the city owns. The dog park, we've talked about the dog park, we visited that piece of property. The dog park, identified through the capital improvement plan, the dog park master plan was just built, really calls for it to be in a couple of different phases. This is that property that we were just talking about just right now. Here's Aldi's and is it Family Dollar? Which one is it?
Dollar Tree.
Dollar Tree, thank you. And then Aldi's is right here, right? So Wheatland here, Rotary Park here. So this really calls for the large open space of the dog park and everything here, some open space, small dog area, water features. And as we've talked about before, there were a number of people really involved with the creation of the plan, and so we certainly want to support them. I know from some of the conversations we've had that the dog park may be dependent on fundraising abilities to really bring that to fruition. We pulled up, when we did the bus tour, we pulled up on this concrete apron right here, and we were looking at this area right here that maybe there was a way to jumpstart the dog park and also do something. But again, nothing's set in stone. The other thing is there's a piece of property, skinny long piece of property right here that the city currently doesn't own, that if we were to move forward with that type of scenario, we'd probably have to try to figure something out with that. For some costs on the dog park, here's a little bit bigger blow up of the dog park and some of the features that are proposed in the plan, watering stations. That was one of the other things we had talked about, is there a way to run some of the water lines, some of the infrastructures, if we were to do something very similar to what has been proposed, and also try to use a small portion of it for a third fire station, just to kind of keep some of those infrastructure costs down. In terms of cost, the dog park phase 1 is proposed at just under $300,000 at $288,000, with the entire thing at $2.8 million is what the proposal is for the dog park.
What's the square footage or acreage for the dog park, and how much would the substation take of it?
I don't know what that, does anybody have any in the room, have any idea? 5 acres? Is that what that whole parcel is?
I believe so, yeah.
5 acres. So we would have to lay it all out from a site plan if we were to look at doing something here, right? But the idea would be to incorporate maybe some of the bathrooms that are called for the dog park and some of those facilities. Is there a way to put, you know, is it this? It's this one. This shows the parking lot here, right? Is there a way to shift the parking lot a little bit so that the entrance for the fire station comes through the parking lot, and you put all that in here a little bit, still preserving all the features that they're talking about, but just shift it slightly, and then build the station, and this again is a small stub station right down here close to the road, very close to the road. So, I mean, you're talking probably not even a quarter of an acre, something small, relatively small on that site. So. Any other questions on the dog park?
I'm just thinking about the humanity of having a fire station right next to a dog park. I mean,
But they would have fire hydrants. The dogs would love it. So.
They love loud noises.
How, when you guys are leaving the station, you're not really hitting the siren usually. I mean, we have the chief and assistant chief here. I mean, sometimes if there's traffic, but it's,
I mean, that is a pretty busy area.
But don't firemen have dogs in their station too?
Usually they have a
Right in the
donation,
truck.
but it's,
Now they have to. Time of day, all of that.
it all factors in, right?
Does the cost
And then
include
Garber and cleanup,
the
you know
amenities
that.
like the dog washing station? Is that all included?
In that 3 million or that 2.8, yes, almost 9
Alright.
million, yes.
On that same subject, I'd be curious in knowing how the projects will impact the operating budget moving forward. Like, for example, with the police department, according to the study, they need to add a couple of positions. And certainly, I would expect that the building would be built to accommodate those new police officers coming on stream. So as I understand it, the impact of the new police station on the operating budget moving forward would be those positions, and also any variation in maintaining the building, insurance, that sort of thing. So I'd be interested in seeing
Yep.
that.
You're 100% correct. So Chief, the matrix report, let's just talk about them one at a time. The matrix report calls for 12 additional police officers, I think.
Yes, sir, that's correct. So it's 11. There's 7 officers, and then they're looking at 4 sergeants as well. And that's just sworn. We're also looking at, they recommended an increase in our professional staff as well, which was 1 records clerk, and the other one was an evidence tech.
And that's to meet the current demand. If some of you saw the
That's correct.
presentation of city council, right, there's some gaps in the chart that they put together. And so that's to meet the current demand.
That's correct. For the proactivity during evenings, and absolutely.
So, I mean, adding 10 plus officers, yes, there is a fiscal impact for sure on the operating budget, without a doubt, 100%. The police department is our largest budget of any of the budgets operating with the general fund. We've been consistently, even with this current budget cycle, talking about what are ways we can mitigate that, right? It's a challenge. It really is a challenge. We've thrown out some ideas. We've thrown out some different ideas about, are there other ways, even when we did the tour of the police station, right? We talked about, I think it was 65% plus of the calls were to commercial businesses.
That's correct.
Right? So the residents are basically subsidizing security. This is my words, nobody else's. Residents are subsidizing the security for our businesses in our community. And so that's something to think about.
So, not knowing quite how you guys are defining demand, so I'm gonna give an example, but the question is, with the 11 that we're hiring, or that is needed to meet current demand, how much time does that add, or how much bandwidth do we have before more will be needed? So if you're measuring demand by number of citizens, if the number of citizens increases by 10%, then we need this many more, or do you have those kind of figures for?
So that's a great question. Based on the information that they use, the Matrix report, or the Matrix company, there's not a significant increase in our population over the next 5 or 10 years. So with the numbers that they're providing us or recommending us to hire, to understand that not all 11 of these officers are going to be on the street. We'll be able to add more criminal investigators. That then now an investigator is going to close these cases much sooner if you're a victim of a crime. Traffic officers, commercial vehicle enforcement, deployment, more animal control, things of that nature. So it's just not patrol that we're dealing with. Understand that although patrol is at minimum staffing, our traffic is under minimum staffing. Our CID is at minimum staffing. So we're having to fill some of these gaps. In addition, our crime prevention officer, I want to add someone else in there as well in our training and personnel. So there's a lot of ancillary duties that we need to fill. But patrols is certainly the backbone.
Kind of piggybacking on what she said though, I mean, like 20 years ago, we didn't need all these extra, and yet, let's say our population hasn't grown,
Correct.
exponentially. And so we can't really say that in 10 or 20 years, now crime is like really bad and we need to hire all these extra detectives and all of this, correct? So,
There's a possibility. I don't know what the forecast of crime is going to be in Duncanville. I wish I did. I'm very data driven. But I know with the information that we have now, the 11 officers or 11 more officers would certainly benefit the citizens and us. You got to understand, our minimum staffing in patrol is 4. That's it. For 40,000 people, we have 4 officers on the street. So if a significant thing happens, it shuts down our city to where we can't do any proactivity. If you're screaming for help, well, are you screaming for help before they did and we're dealing with this and somebody else, DeSoto or Cedar Hill, has to come and answer that call? And we don't want anybody else but us answering the calls from our citizens. So to answer your question, I'm not sure what the forecast is going to be. I will say that we'll do everything that we can to ensure our response time stays the same. And it's good considering the type of calls, the priority calls that we answer.
Based on what you said, it sounds like the demand was based on number of citizens, amount of crime, number of traffic incidents. Are there other constructs to that, how they define demand that you didn't mention?
Absolutely. So it is merely, and see if I can flip to it really quick. So productivity. So how do we deal with crime? Well, we deal with crime by holding people accountable. So ultimately, what it looks like, if I may. So when we add these officers, it goes from this, where you have and a lot of our crimes occur between 6 and 10. Well, all you're doing at this time is answering call to call to call because you're so busy. So it goes from that, and when you add those officers, you get this, where you have more of that time to go out and be proactive, to attempt to hopefully catch some of these people before they commit a crime. So that's what they're looking at, is our proactivity more than anything.
I'll share a fairly recent example with you. Just recently, I had somebody that had complained about the response time of our police department relative to someone whose cell phone was stolen. And I called the chief and I said, the person contacted me because they were waiting almost an hour for the police to show up over a stolen cell phone. I said, that doesn't sound right. So he's like, well, let me look at it. He comes back, and I was actually embarrassed for asking the question, but he comes back, well, they did like 16 calls in the matter of that hour that had a lot higher priority than a stolen cell phone. There was burglaries, there was medicals, there was just any number of different related things. So
when these calls come in, when you dial 911 or a non-emergency, it's no different with the fire department. Our dispatchers triage them, and they determine based on the severity whether it's a P1 priority call, and it goes down to a P5. So a lot of times dog barking, that's going to be your quality of life, and that's going to be lower in the queue if you have other calls holding. However, for the most part, our officers do a really good job when there's calls holding. They'll go and answer them, and then they'll get to that call fairly quickly. However, like I said, if we have a major accident on the highway, that's my best example. It shuts down our law enforcement, our PD, and for the most part, the FD, because it takes so much of us and so much effort to shut down 20. That is an Autobahn. There's no question about it. And I don't want to be out there, nor do they want to be out there unsafe, so it shuts down everybody.
well, he mentions an Autobahn. I'll just share with you without getting into a lot of details, right? But there's also an Autobahn for crime.
That's right.
Across 20 and 67. And where does it meet? It meets in Duncanville, right? And for better or worse, that's what a police department is dealing with. They're dealing with major crime that is coming into the community because of those two highways.
That's right.
So that's a lot of their time is spent on that.
Absolutely.
So keep in mind too, what I would say is if we were to move forward with this building, you're probably talking about 27 time period opening, and then we would have to phase in the officers, right? So it wouldn't all happen right at once, and it also wouldn't hit the budget all at once. And hopefully the DCEDC in the meantime finds us lots of sales tax dollars to bring to the community, and there'll be no problem at all.
That's job one.
Exactly. So.
Well, to something that I'm concerned about. If we do go forward with this, I would hope that the city would be transparent with the community and say, if this passes, this means that our taxes are gonna have to go up later because we have to hire the people to fill this building.
Yeah, and those numbers, what was the projected time period on the matrix report? Do you remember? Did they give us?
There was, I believe it was 2035.
So that's a longer term. Now, it did start calling for additional officers to be added sooner
Immediately,
rather
yeah.
than later. But it could be
2029, I'm
phased in.
sorry.
2029?
Yes, sir.
So it could be phased in. When it comes to the service center, and Shahai, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't necessarily think we're talking about quote unquote adding positions. It's more about trying to get the staff together and out of the hodgepodge of places and closets where we've put everybody together right now. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We do have a lot of employees really that are just, not necessarily even positioned, with the rest of the team being, split between different buildings just because they don't have enough space to be all in one building where most efficiency is really gonna be when everybody is really in the same building. But a lot of these teams are split around between different buildings because of the lack of space. Now, there's also a lot of issues with the storage and drawings. Like, for example, we're dealing with the issue now, we need to clear some space here in the city with drawings that was archived and moved away from the service center because there was no space in the service center. Now, we have no space here and we need that space, and now we don't know where to take those drawings. So we're trying to figure out something like that, and that's just a simple example of what we're dealing with, but not necessarily trying to add more positions in the future.
On the plus side, there's a lot of studies that actually suggest, especially for heavy equipment and some of the stuff the service center has, the more the vehicle is stored inside, actually it extends the life cycle of the vehicle. So that may actually help us a little bit. And we have honestly had some situations. You saw it when you did a tour of the service center with people breaking in and stealing stuff and everything else. I want to go back real quick, just for a quick second, to the police facility, because the other thing that this building would be, if we did it, that we didn't really touch on, is court does not currently have a facility. And so we're talking about making this a public safety facility, that there would be a large room that would be a combo training center and also for court to use, so that could be used.
Isn't that 1,400 square feet smaller than option A though? On the actual square footage added?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I thought that the park one, or the one with the walkway of heroes or whatever, is like 1,400 square feet less of usable space of the actual structure. So is the course building going in
Inside the
either
same
structure?
building. No, so it would probably be on the first floor, right? Those are some of the details to be worked out, but it would probably be on the first floor and serve as a multi-purpose room. There is some wording that came in from, specifically from one of the architects that kind of gave us some concept, high-level type stuff, but none of that has been architecturally drawn yet.
So the square footage is not different, because in here it's less, and so that's what I was trying to understand. Because you've given us a slide that says it's.
When I get to that, you're skipping ahead.
Oh, was I ahead? I thought I went backwards. I'm so sorry.
Well, I have a question about
Yes,
the
go
court.
ahead.
I mean, so right now, the room next door to us is serving dual purpose and it's being used all day, every day.
You're absolutely right, it
So
is.
what will happen to it?
It doesn't meet any of the regulations for court. There's all kinds of regulations that talks about the way the judges have to be and the attorneys and everything else, and it's all that kind of stuff.
I literally presented to district courts and churches.
Of course, it
So,
happens. It absolutely happens. It
So
absolutely
What
happens.
will we use that for to make it worth, I mean, that
Well,
would be
it
a lot
still
of
gets
space.
used. It still gets used. It absolutely gets used. In addition to council, obviously, you know that there's P and Z and there's other meetings that take place in there. It does get used some during the day for some of larger, what I would say, community meetings or staff meetings, those types of things. Could it be repurposed? Absolutely. Are there other things need to be figured out? Absolutely. But the big thing, do you want to touch on the training room?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I have aspired to do is bring training to Duncanville. Be the hub of the Southwest County for any types of training. Trust me, we have the experts in our police department. I have sent people to these schools. Right now, we can't do it just because y'all seen our training room. You fit 14 people in. Plus, I'm gonna try to recruit you. How does it look if I bring you into our police department to try to recruit you and they go back to like, well, our police department was built 30 years before y'all and it's much better. So there's some dual purpose. As he said, the training room will be huge. It brings people to Duncanville. Of course, when you train people here, where do they go eat lunch? So I'm bringing people here, plus it's a recruiting tool. I am tired of sending people to local police departments to get training or to have to go do this or do that. I want people to come to us. I want us to be the pinnacle of the police departments in all of Dallas County, if not the state. And it starts with training.
We just haven't mentioned it yet tonight. A lot of them that did the tour saw the evidence room.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, just the ventilation system is ridiculous. You guys have all walked through it. And I applaud our two employees who have to sit through that and take it. You get a headache if you're in there for 5 minutes and they endure it for 40 hours a week. Yes, sir.
So I'm certainly sympathetic with what you just said in terms of if we can get you this wonderful training room and you can have training every week, and so they'll be going to lunch in Duncanville restaurants every week.
Absolutely.
That's a great
And
idea.
and here's the thing too, is understand that when you alternate revenue sources, well, when we teach, we get paid for that. Because albeit it costs money to set up all this stuff. And so that is an alternate revenue source for us.
So would the training room be exclusively or primarily for police, or how would that
No,
work?
I think what I envision is, first off, the training room needs to be outside of the secured area. That way, now it's a community room. Now the community, and a lot of police departments are doing that now, where they have a large room where the community come in and hold their meetings in a safe environment. You're at the police department. Of course, there's, as he put it, the other meetings that we would have, but it would be outside our secure area.
And you might remember, and not to belabor this when you talk about some other projects, but the heat map that we saw when we did the tour, right? One of the hot spots was actually the police station for the exchanges. So
That's
you could
right.
use the training room for that.
Absolutely. There's, listen, I understand there's a finite amount of money if this goes and everything's done. There's a lot of things I want, but it's going to come down to the needs of that department and what we need to function as ultimately a 74, 75 person department. So there's going to be things that we're going to have to pull out, but a non-negotiable, in my opinion, is the training room, and it needs to be a very large training room for us to be able to really host a lot of things. Supervisor schools would come in and do things. I'm a huge proponent of the FBI classes. The only place that I know of is in Fort Worth that does it, so we would be a good training hub for the FBI to come in and do a lot of the supervisory and command classes. That's huge. It's great training, and it puts us back on the map. That's the important thing.
So how often would you guys use them? I mean, you guys
Every
need
week
one
if I could.
every week.
Absolutely. We're doing a lot of, we would have our entrance exams in this room as well. We just had a town hall meeting at the senior center on a neighborhood suite. We would host that here because all of our resources are here. So there's a myriad of uses for that room. Just one room in an entire building.
Just some input in terms of what the magnet that could provide for Southwest Dallas County, being right here where we're located physically. There's a lot of meetings that are held in North Central Council of Governments in Arlington. And a lot of that could move here, right down to Southwest Dallas County, because that's where it's held. I mean, I went to some meetings up in Arlington, go like, you know, I just drove 35 minutes to get here, and I was here for 1 hour. If I would have driven here, I'm right around the corner, plus it would be a magnet for Wilmer Hutchins, right on down 45, and Cedar Hill, Lancaster, and the Four Corps, plus even Bald Springs coming down 635. One of the things that I went to, I remember, was procurement. Dallas County hosted a procurement seminar in their new building. It was on Polk, I guess. And there must have been 200 people there from all over southwest Dallas County to come in for that. Another one was broadband, but they held it up in downtown Dallas if you wanted to learn about broadband, what the city of Dallas was doing for broadband. It was a mess. It was really, really difficult. So what Chief was talking about in terms of other municipal types of training that we could be a magnet for, I think would be absolutely wonderful to be able to do that. And talking about, you know, what's going across the street in Wheatland Plaza. Monty is building that food court that's gonna be right up where
That's right.
what's it called, Vineyard used to be. That's under construction at this moment. It's within walking distance of this building. So in terms of where they wanna go to eat, they don't have to even drive to it. They could walk across the street to Wheatland Plaza, they could eat in the food court, spend money there 5 days a week if they wanted to, whatever we wanted to do with it. So
Absolutely.
it's that magnet attraction in terms of economic viability.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, another concept is having an officer assigned to the lobby, where they have their desk, instead of picking up the red phone and calling dispatch, now you have an officer greeting them as they come in and taking their reports. So there's a lot of stuff, but again, you have a finite amount of money, and when that happens, things start pulling out. So that's all for me. Thank you, sir.
Fire station, you got the chief and the assistant chief are both here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If we build a third fire station, it's gonna cost more. It's gonna be more people, it's gonna be more equipment. And I have to calculate exactly, we figured 18 additional firefighters to staff a fire station, 3 shifts.
Minimum, 18 to 21.
Yeah. It's a significant expense. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Through here, the dog park, if we were to construct that, and again, I think that a lot of that was really earmarked for fundraising and those types of things, but obviously you don't necessarily have the quote unquote people. Parks and Rec absorbs it, but there is still cost. One of the things that I know some of the conversations have been, and I don't know if it happened during the discussion or not, but there was even some talk about maybe there could be some annual fees or some other things to help offset some of the costs for the people that use it. User fee, basically, type of a situation for the dog park to help with some of that. But that's to be determined. That's down the road. Let's see, where did we leave off? The Ladd Nature Preserve. Ladd Nature Preserve, very similar to the dog park. It would go into the Parks and Rec. Here's the cost: $9 million, $9.5 million if it was constructed in totality in 2027. 10.1 million if it was constructed in 2029. There's phases, there's some different segments there. Again, I think that really the thought behind this is that there would be grant opportunities, fundraising opportunities, that this would have to be very much an ongoing build it as you can type thing. I can't imagine truthfully that we'd be able to roll this into some sort of a bond project to do what the plan really calls for. Any questions on? Yes, ma'am.
In the meantime, since it's probably a very long-term project, what level of usability is there in the meantime? Because when I go out there, I see one trail to the creek, and since it's native landscape, everything's very tall, can't really walk through it. Just seems very unusable right now.
Yeah. So there is the parking lot, right? And so there is a pathway. I think that's the one you're talking about that goes back to the creek off of the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
That goes back, not so much anything really from the Daniel Dale side. That's all pretty much overgrown and everything. And then from the Santa Fe side, technically the city doesn't own that 7 acres yet. We're working on that right now. It was included with the overall master plan and everything. So I think what I have heard from number of folks, including folks with the Duncanville Nature Conservancy, and we're also looking at some grant opportunities, is what can be done on a phase one approach, really kind of cutting in at least a starting point trail to go back to the creek, to go back to there's some little waterfalls. For those of you that haven't been back there, it actually is very, very beautiful along the creek, and you see the limestone cut-ins and everything else. I know that the gentleman who donated it to us has shared that he would really like to partner with us maybe in doing kind of like a phase one splash and really trying to get some sort of an educational building, maybe that there's an opportunity to really enhance that. But it's going to be a challenge with the funding, to be honest with you. It's going to have to just be a little bit at a time unless we can really find a grant that could help us with that. The immediate plan, though, is to get control of that additional 7 acres. That's what we're immediately working on. Because then the master plan actually calls for the parking lot to go on that 7 acres. And so then that would really start to change the way that you enter the property and how you go about some of that.
Yeah.
There's some challenges. There's definitely some challenges. There's not enough money to go around, the fiscal constraints, right? So this shows it here. This is that 7 acre tract. Here's the parking lot, some buildings, the trails, all to go in. This is what we were talking about, the Daniel Dale side over here. This is all really thick prairie, black
Black land.
Thank you. Yes.
Buffalo grass.
Yeah. What'd you say?
Buffalo grass.
So that whole area, and then the current parking lot is back here, but that's what they're saying is it would move over to the 7 acres over here. Any other questions on the nature preserve? All right, so I want to share with you a couple of strategies. We start to roll up our sleeves and get into some of this. So, thinking back to the slide where we showed you for the service center, we'll start with the easy one. The service center with the 2 buildings, the administration building and then the barn separately. So, estimating a 12,000 square foot administration building at about 350 square feet comes up to a cost of about $4.2 million. Fleet, or the barn area, 15,000 square feet, about $3 million site improvements, $2 million utilities, for a total project cost between $10 and $12 million, which seems to be very consistent with an overall cost of quite a few of the different things that we've looked at. Now here's the good news. We still have just about $2 million from the 2018 bond project for the service center. And the money over the last couple of years has earned about $2 million in interest, if I'm correct, Richard, it's about right. So we have $4 million currently that could go towards actually building that administrative office building. Completely separate from doing another bond, doing anything else. There would still be some site improvements, maybe not the whole $2.1 million for that particular section of the property. But there is a very real possibility that we could go ahead. One of the things you may want to consider in part of your deliberations is whether or not to recommend moving forward essentially immediately with the construction of the service center administration portion without taking out any more bonding or anything else.
What's the dominoes of doing that? What's the impact of building the admin office building on the other things that needs to be done? Is there anything that's like automatic because we did this other piece is required?
Well, we'll have to, let me go back to that map just so we can, I'm a visual person. I like to see stuff as we're talking about it, right? So what we'd be talking about is building this, right? Mm-hmm. So there would still be some site improvements, right? We'd have to do the parking lot. And that's some of the costs we'd have to figure out exactly. The utilities, those types of things. That means eventually this would need to become, not this, but this, okay? But that could be evaluated as part of either a bond or kicking the can down the road if you say not to do a bond. But there's really, it's a matter of we have the money has to be used for the service center, the 2 million. And then the other 2 million has to be used for one of the projects associated with the 2018 bond project, and this is one of, so there's limited things that we can do with that money, and it could help at least to advance the ball. That's what I would say.
There are big shortfalls. Didn't we have a meeting, like there's no parking in Harrington and stuff? Is that what the other 2 million is?
There's no parking where?
Like in Harrington, but are we having problems? Maybe I'm crazy. Didn't the parks people tell us that we were still falling short on street
On
repairs?
phase-
And
On phase 2, right? So
is that
phase,
not
so
part of the
we're,
2018 bond though?
it is, so let's talk about that for a second. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of the Harrington Park project, there were 3 different phases associated with that. We are currently advancing and working on phase 1 and phase 3 right now. Phase 2 is where the budget shortfall that you're talking about doing. So that money could also be used for that, for phase 2 of the Harrington
Do
Park.
we know the total, like, I mean, because it wasn't just Harrington, right? Didn't we have streets, like, when there's street repairs that still need to be done? Do we have a dollar amount for what the shortfall 2018? Because it'd be kind of weird to borrow 2018 bond for 2018 projects.
Well, so the challenge is, so right, thinking back to those 2018 bond projects, like one of the ones was one of the streets that you're talking about, Camp Wisdom and Main Street, right? So that was $1 million, Richard, I think it was $1 million, yeah, $1 million for that project. We're working on grants, we're working on all kinds of things. We don't even know what it's gonna be because honestly, when we did that, they just kind of threw a number up. And I've had that confirmed for me now from a couple of different, they were like, okay, this is what we think it would be, but there was not a lot of engineering. So one of the things that we've looked at is how far back that would have to go if you were to taper that off and everything. I mean, we're nowhere near what I would say, anywhere close to doing anything in Maine and Camp Wisdom unless we get some grant funding.
Yeah, I mean, the availability of the funds is just $1.5 million, and the current estimate is about a little less than $7 million for that work. So it's way far, and we're working on some grant opportunity with COG, but that also is down the line because we're a little bit also down the list of the applicants. So we're probably, if get awarded, we need 2 to 3 years probably from now before we would have any money in to do that if get selected.
Then the other thing that was in the 2018 bond project, right? So it was 4 different propositions. Prop D was the service center. Prop C was Fire Station 1, that's completed. Prop 2 was the street stuff that we're talking about, including Maine and Camp Wisdom. There was also some trails associated with that. So one of the challenges there, and Shahad is working with our Director of Parks and Rec right now, we don't have a trails master plan currently, and so that's one of the things. You want to just touch on that?
Yeah. So we're currently, a lot of the trails that opportunities that the Duncanville has is really on the roadway network. So for that, we really came up with the idea of trying to leverage multiple things together in one. So we are working on a mobility and transportation master plan where it includes elements for bike and pedestrian planning, and that should cover trails on roadway network opportunities for Duncanville. But before that, we had no trails master plan. We had bikes. It says not really an engineered master plan either. We have a bikes map on the city website that was developed internally just to seek some grant applications in the past that we did not get awarded and we were not successful with. So it's not necessarily any engineered map that we can really go back and rely on. So we need to create something engineered where we're looking at multiple elements, the idea of complete streets, different elements where we look at the city in general as a from a transportation and mobility perspective and see what's the opportunities for Duncanville and what projects can overlap together into one bigger project or meaningful project for the city that includes some of these elements.
Yeah, so, and then I was just pulling it up here. So Maine and Camp Prop B was South Cedar Ridge, That's currently 61%, and that's starting construction, right?
Yeah, Cedar Ridge has completed design, 100% design. We are currently working on the bidding schedule, so we just had a meeting about it today. We're ready to bid the project out. We're just going through the process of the bidding before we can really bid the project out. But it's going to construction for the section from Camp Wisdom to Middale Road.
And then Daniel Road, that's complete. Main at Camp Wisdom, we just talked about. The trails was phase 1 trails 100% complete under Prop A. Phase 2 trails 0% complete, but that's what Shahad was just talking about. And then the Harrington Park improvements. So the Harrington Park improvements was originally bonded for $2.9 million, and it looks like expenditures total project budget now is estimated at $6.5 million.
So
So
there
there's-
are 3 phases to the Harrington Park project. We were able to finish 1 phase, and actually we are in the construction of the phase 3, but because of the shortage of the estimates current estimate compared to the bonded amount, there is phase 2 that is left out currently, which is mainly the parking. We have no funds to address, so we kind of tabled it for now.
And then Shahad is working with Parks on the bridge as part of that project.
Yeah, there's a pedestrian bridge that's gonna be crossing the 10 Mile Creek over there in the Harrington Park, and we're working on evaluating the impact of the bridge on the creek and the floodplain, basically.
So, have we adjusted strategies or recommendations so that doesn't happen with the next bond?
Yeah, multiple ways. I think we talked about this at one of our first meetings. First, from a bonding perspective, and Richard and I have talked about this. Richard Jackson's our CFO sitting here in the room. Richard and I have talked about it. There's different ways you can go about it, but it really doesn't make a lot of sense to take the bond out at the beginning. Instead, what you're better off doing is borrowing money until the project's completing and then getting the bond at the end. That way you don't run into the situation that Duncanville's currently in. They took out the entire bond at the very beginning. They're sitting on the money, and then COVID hit, right? There were things that happened, external, nobody's control. But here we are, we've got the municipal bond sitting there, we're collecting interest on it, that's that $2 million in interest, and costs continue to go up, right? So that's where it has to be a very, very detailed timeline of how that works. That's where, I shared some of the cost I'm estimating based on a 27, and what that would look like if we were to move forward with this. But Michael, going back to your point, the $2 million could be used for any one of the projects associated with the 2018 bond, but it has to be used for one of those projects. It can't be something outside of that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take something, but I mean, we've had a great point of should we do a bond, but we already know in 2018 they said we're gonna do a bond and we wanna do these projects, and I don't know that it's incumbent upon us to be like, your projects aren't as important anymore. I don't know how well received that would be, especially if we're concerned with the democratic aspect of this. That was
Sure.
certainly
Yeah. No, you're good. Good question. Other
Well,
questions?
and the thing that just gets me is, so I'm finding out just now that aspects of those bond projects were just kind of thrown together. Well, we think it's gonna cost this much, so we'll ask the citizens for all this money, and we have no clue how much it's really gonna cost. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, so ultimately, you guys are making recommendations, right, to council. Council ultimately makes those decisions in terms of engineer cost, request for proposals, all of that type of stuff to verify that. So that'll all come a little bit later, but for right now, what you guys are really going back to the 5 questions, right, is that's what we need to focus on. So I feel like we have really good estimates on these costs based on where things are at, where construction is going. But if another COVID happens, I mean, anything is possible. What I would say the biggest difference is we wouldn't take out the bond at the very beginning, right? So that way it protects the city. Other questions?
So is there other money that, if, I think getting back to that point, is there other money that could go toward the unfinished projects?
Right, well, that's, these other projects, right, Shab was just talking about, like like for instance, Maine at Camp Wisdom, perfect example. We're going after grant money, we're going after other funding. Is there other money in the city that could use? I mean, the city council ultimately has control over how much they appropriate a fund balance. But I think that it sounds like the preferred methodology, at least, is to try to identify grant sources and other sources on exactly what that would do. But there's not really a definitive plan for Maine at Camp Wisdom, really, right now. It's more, we could do this, we could do that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at, we have proposed something at which we are trying to really correct the grade difference on that intersection with the railroad. We had conversations with BNSF and we have had a plan put together with them to basically be able to correct the grading issue and redevelop the intersection to some extent, you know, including subsurface utility and pavement. But that was what we're at. I think based on that, we had the minimum estimate of what we can do, really. But once the project is more realistically closed, or we're going to be able to know from a survey like level information based on the grade whether those going to be very accurate estimates or not, or we have to kind of do some change of plans. Depends on really.
So what I would tell you guys is, so this is available on the website, and this is actually in your binder. It's page 15 of your binder. It's right at the very beginning of the 2018 bond projects. This shows you Proposition A, Proposition B, Proposition C, and Proposition D. Proposition A, a lot of that's completed. Proposition B, Cedar Ridge is actually all set and going forward. The only one is on Proposition B is this Maine at Camp Wisdom. Proposition C is the fire station, that's complete. The one that needs the love is the service center, exactly what we're talking about. That's the one that the voters said, yes, do that. You guys have all been out to the service center and seen it. That's the one where we haven't made the progress. So that's what I'm saying, is just kind of with where we're at right now, doing it a little bit different, breaking it apart. Going back to that diagram there for a quick second. Breaking it apart, we could probably start to move in that direction without a bond or anything to get that first part of the building done, using that $4 million that we currently have available.
I kind of feel like you're obligated to do that. That's what it's for.
Yeah, I mean, do you really need our okay to?
It would be good for you guys to recommend it as part of you do the because that's what the charge of the council was, for you guys to evaluate these. So that could be, honestly, I'm trying to give you an easy win here, to be honest with you. You could say, hey, look, we evaluated this, and so, and then here's some money, and you could probably go ahead and do this, and this is a way you could do it, right? So then the question now becomes, what happens next, right? So let me fast forward here. There's a little table here that goes back and lists some of these. Okay, so this kind of breaks it apart, right? So this 10 to 12 million kind of overall, kind of what we were talking about, you could basically, we could say using the 2018 bond money that we already have, we could do this. The question is the utilities, maybe some of the site work for that particular cost, or even the fuel pumps, those types of things. Whether or not that could be done, whether it's fund balance or some other mechanism, one time is what we call those, or whether or not you would want to propose a bond, right? So the barn, the fleet bay, doing the rest of that, I really don't know of another way to be honest with you. You're not really gonna get grants for doing that type of a project. There's not very many grants for those types of things. The rest of the site work, those types of things, that would probably require a new bond to do that. Police Public Safety Building, this is where Michael was skipping ahead, right? You're good. So, page 42 of the options. So, with the architect that we were working with, just to kind of give us an overall idea, kind of what we're talking about, they kind of broke this apart of this new facility, right? So there's about 15,000 square feet in total. What they proposed is building option A that they had shown as a additional 13,672 square feet for a total of 29,050 square feet. Now they also showing about single floor versus a 3-story building, that sort of stuff. And I'm not 100% sure if those numbers are accurate because it didn't line up in the math when I did it too, which I think is what you were getting at, right? And then option B, they showed us the existing 15,000 with an additional 12,635 square feet being built as a first floor, second floor option for a total of 28,000 square feet. And then I kind of threw to get this together like an option C. If we were to build, again, this would really be fiscally constrained of what this would look like. This is on page 44. But kind of taking a hybrid approach of those, if we were to build a new 15 to 20,000 square foot building for that public safety building, what the cost would look like for that. And basically what it works out to is about $800 a square foot. You're talking about $8.5 to $10 million approximately for that. This isn't holding cells. This isn't all the costs associated with a typical jail. We don't have to worry about this, those types of things. It's the different stuff that we've talked about, the break room, the locker support area, the workspace, the training center, those types of things. So basically, here's kind of a breakdown of what you would be estimating based on those costs. You're talking about 11 to 13 million for option A if it's a 3-story, option B if it's a 2-story, or if you could go to some sort of hybrid model, you're talking about the $8 to $10 million range. Again, we do not have, Richard, do we have, let me ask it this way, Richard, do we have anywhere in our budget where we can absorb $10 million to build a new police facility?
I was searching my pockets right now, Bob. No.
Like 2 years.
They're just, I mean, literally, we're working on budget right now, and it is a challenge. It is tough. So there's just not $10 million laying around anywhere that we could just say, okay, we'll absorb it. I want to talk to you about some, and I want to be cognizant of time here too. So let me just advance through a couple of these things here relatively quickly, and then come back to answer questions. So this overall breakdown, the 44 million on the low term, 68 million on the high cost. I mean, ultimately, you know, going back to those questions, question one, should we take out a bond? And then, you know, what would be the priorities? That's ultimately where you guys have got to provide some feedback, right? Is it the service center? Do we expand that? Is it police? Is it fire? You took a tour of the rec center. Is it the rec center? Is it the library? You took a tour of that. We talked about tonight the dog park, the Ladd Nature Preserve. We talked about some of the general stuff, the IT improvements, those types of things. We did run some numbers. If we were to take out a $25 million bond, just to share with you some ideas on what this would look like. The annual debt service payment for 30 years would be $1.6 million. For 20 years, it would be $1.8 1.9 almost. And for 15 years, it would be about $2.2 million. Obviously, the shorter the term, the less in interest you repay, the more advantageous the terms are. This chart kind of gives you a breakdown of kind of what's going on in terms of the debt tax rate out through the years 2045 and what that looks like if we were to take out a $25 million bond in addition to the 2018 bond that we already have, that we're already making payments on. and then what that would look like. Essentially, Richard and I have gone through the numbers, we've talked with our financial advisors. Here's what I can tell you. Our current tax rate is 61 cents, based on our taxable value. As long as our taxable value stays steady, if you were to say yes to a $25 million bond and get as much done as you can, and then we'd have to get into some of the details in terms of that. We know that the debt service tax rate would be about 4 or 5 cents, okay? Based on where we anticipate the taxable value to go over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I truly believe, I'm not gonna speak for Richard, I'm gonna speak for myself. I believe we can keep the tax rate at 61 cents and absorb that 5 cents, if that was a level playing field. Now, does that mean the average homeowner is not gonna pay more taxes? No, that's not what that means, right? Because your taxable value continues to go up on your house, so the payment that you would make would go up. And we could dig into some of those numbers to let you know exactly what that is and kind of break down where the tax rate goes over the next couple of years and everything with that. But essentially, if 61 cents was our base rate, and that's our INS rate, that 5 cent increase, we could keep our tax rate right around 61 cents. Now, if we're adding 18 firefighters, that's a different story.
Which we would have to. So, I mean, keeping it at.
If we did
61
that project,
cents is
right.
really, I mean, even adding the police, so I think that's unrealistic, keep it at 61.
Well, the debt service, right, so let me just be clear about that. So there's, when you look at the tax rate, it's actually 2 different tax rates. It's the debt service, it's the INS tax rate, and then it's also the operations tax rate, right? So the combined total currently is the 61 cents. What's our INS rate, 4 cents?
4 cents.
Something like that. So what I'm saying is that the operations rate would actually decrease a little bit. The debt service rate, the INS rate would go up a little bit. It would still stay the 61 cents. But eventually, if we were to add additional services, to your point, the operations rate would have to go up, and then you would clip that 61 cents. Unless there's alternative sources of revenue. You heard the chief say it, and it's something we preach every single day, looking for alternative sources of revenue, whether it's a PID, whether it's some other way of funding these initiatives.
And you just mentioned, you know, if values continue to go up for the next 3, 4 years, well, we're still paying for the 2018 bond, and that's far beyond 3 or 4 years. So I just feel like these numbers are just being thrown around. I feel like we're at the end of the evening, and now we're seeing numbers that we need to really be focusing on.
Nothing's been thrown around, and honestly, this was in the very first meeting that I gave you. It's actually in your packet on the very first couple of pages. This is not changed. This is literally a copy and paste from that very same thing. And we're not asking you to make any decisions tonight. This is
We're really done into this in another meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So where does the 4.5% come from? Because prime right now is 7.5.
It is. Hopefully it'll go down, right?
Well, you know, I'm currently working with someone else right now on heavy duty commercial loan, and we're playing around. The best rate I'm seeing is like 6.875, big swap rate.
My municipal bond
That's
rates are
what I'm saying. So the municipal bond rate cannot be compared to what we see as prime. And
We're gonna
so-
drill into those,
so-
right? Because I have questions about those too, but another meeting, right?
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
the
we still have
strength of
time.
our bond rating coming from our financial advisors, what are we at, an A plus right now? We're an A, so, okay, so
Yeah.
that's what's,
So we're at a
that's
solid,
giving us the 4.5.
We're good. So,
yeah, so to that point, we're at a solid rating, and we're remaining stable as of the last bond rating information that came in from the respective agencies.
So if we were to put this into a timeline, knowing that the city council has to approve this in July, it has to be sent forward to the state to be on the election for November by some date in August. Are we absolutely certain, Richard, that 4.5 is gonna hold for whatever the city council, what we decide as a bond committee and what city council is gonna decide, it's gonna be at 4.5?
that has to be.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna say,
know
we
it's-
can't,
I mean, it's trying to
Yeah,
nail
when we
gel
say-
to a wall.
Right.
yeah, Mr. Gordon, when we say absolute, like, we can't say absolute, right? However, given where we are in terms of our bond rating and where we're potentially going to rate at, is that puts us in a position where we're gonna get a highly competitive rate. So, but again, as we know that from the market, that it could work in our favor or not, depending on, where the Fed even goes with some of their rate changes that potentially could be coming down between now and when we would
So would it be to
potentially
our
go.
credit as a bond committee examining this interest rate, not knowing where it's really gonna go? But the timeline is really short between now and July, what can happen. Would it be to our credit as a bond committee and to you, the city manager, CFO, to give us some iterations, like 4.5, 4.56, 4.7, 4.8, so that we understand that there's a possibility between now and August of that bond rate changing? So what would we be looking at? Best case is 4.5, worst case would be 4 point something, maybe even 5 point something, so that we have a complete well-rounded picture of the possibility, the potential.
I hear what you're saying. So
Worst
we,
case.
we gave you, one of the very first meetings, we gave you a sheet from our bond council
Right.
that actually had a lot of that information in it, as well as their recommendation, as well as our debt service, and then our ratio and everything. So you guys have all that information in your packet. What I would say though is, I'm concerned about you guys getting too far in the weeds, to be 100% honest with you. Because that stuff is gonna have to be bid out. And so that'll come after council even makes a decision whether or not to move forward. We're gonna talk about ranges. That's all we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about range impacts in your recommendation. Eventually though,
Those are
if
the
council,
iterations of-
yeah. if council says, yes, we're gonna put this up for voters, right? And then we put it out for bid, that's the first time we're really gonna know what the bond rates are.
And that's gonna be asked in November.
Absolutely, right, 100%, yes. So I think what you guys have to focus on is the evaluation of the projects, whether or not you believe those warrant taking out a bond, and understanding the range of the fiscal impact. That's very, very much something that's under your purview. And then whether or not you want to recommend to council whether or not they should consider taking out a bond. Going back to the five questions, right? Question number one, even though it's question number one, you kind of need to evaluate everything before you can answer question number one, right? You got to know, okay, really, what is the real fiscal impact here?
So in your opinion, going back to the question here, is O&M on our purview or only INS?
I would say INS.
See, that's key.
Yep.
We think about, your question about, has great merit about what about the operational side, but it's not within our purview to consider. It's good to have in the back of our brain.
Yep.
But what we have to only consider for our determination for decision making is INS.
And you could absolutely, as part of eventually any presentation, whatever way it goes to council, say, we strongly advise council to consider the operations impact of adding this and adding that, and those types of things, right?
Right.
But that's not necessarily for you
Outside of
to
what we're looking
evaluate, yes. Is that fair?
Then,
All right, what other questions can I answer? All very, very good questions.
Take the Camp Wisdom main and dump it.
you can always take that money and just use it to pay down the debt.
Well,
So
it-
then you'd be starting from a lower interest rate on the INS side.
Could do that too.
If reassignment of the projects, the funds, general for bond, has to be also elected and voted by
I know.
public as well.
However, the one caveat we have with that is even though it's identified on this paper as Maine at Camp Wisdom, when you actually look at the bond language, it actually talks about Main Street. So there is some flexibility that we could you know, Shahad's working on a grant right now for sidewalks with TxDOT. There's other, you know, it could be a match for walkability in Main Street, and it could be some other things. So there is some flexibility because of the way it was worded. It was a very broad description, actually, in the legal
Some of it was
notifications.
actually the possibility of looking better on the buildings that are in the shopping center. Camp Houston would have been better for I-20. Spend some money on the backside of those buildings, so we would look nicer from I-20 than just from the front. That was a possibility for that money as well.
That is weird.
Yeah, there's some flexibility.
You know, I'm so familiar with that Camp Houston main thing. In the railroad, yeah, it's,
So in terms of meeting schedule too, the conversation is taking place here. The next meeting is June 19th. That is a scheduled city holiday. Happy to meet with you guys if you still want to do that. If you want to move it to yes, June 19th. If you want to move it to a different day, if you want to rethink something.
No, gotta go if you don't want to.
I'm open for suggestions. The floor is open for suggestions.
I can't meet before that date because I've scheduled a trip to be back by that date.
So the thought is either we meet that date or we meet later, or we just.
It's whatever you guys want. It's
you know,
whatever you guys
in
want.
fairness to city staff, it's a holiday.
Yeah.
And if we choose to meet on June 19th, which is it's the Juneteenth National Freedom Day, then we're requiring staff to come in on a day that they would be accorded off.
It's not really great optics.
Never, it's not.
So would we reschedule it to that next week, or what would you do?
I think honestly, anything is,
July 22nd is the all something meeting. Oh,
What do we recommend?
June?
What do we recommend?
is the June?
Figure out when to move the
No,
19th.
when are we presenting to city council?
I was just trying to figure out how many weeks we had before that all things.
I think we only have 2 more.
What if
we
we
could-
meet on Monday, the 23rd of June?
When is our P and Z?
It's the ninth.
They're still talking about doing it.
I kind of wonder.
We didn't make a decision
I kind of
on it
wonder
twice.
about EDC, because EDC
Twice
was
a month.
full
Oh,
here.
no,
He said that would be later.
Ooh, summer, okay.
Yeah, so PNC is next Monday. It would be
23rd, yeah.
there's a DC meeting that night.
Yeah.
The 23rd.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The 26th, that's a Thursday.
the 25th. Wednesday.
I have a meeting on the 24th.
I can do the 25th.
Down.
What's the,
I can do the 25th.
I might miss it, but I'll try.
Everybody here, this is getting down to the wire. Well, what about the 20th? I know it's a Friday, but it's the day after we would normally be meeting.
and it's a Friday.
When we go back and look at what work we require of staff on the day after a holiday that they're off, it means they're really working on that holiday.
Well, I understand that, but here we are trying to just pick a day.
Did we say the 25th?
But we cram ourselves into June and July, we have.
They're
work
not
to do.
Available on the 24th or that 25th Saturday.
Or the
What about the 30th?
What about the 26th?
I guess
She's not
Oh,
available.
you're not available, okay.
Me either.
The 30th?
The 30th?
Oh, June?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything 20, 20, or 30th is fine with me.
Oh,
27th is when I got my filing.
let's see,
Okay. 30th?
I'm not, y'all, June is really bad for me, I'm out of town. I'm out of town on the 30th, 29th, I'll be in Houston.
So what decisions will we be making at the next meeting?
So we're at the point, what I would say is, we've got to start working on the draft report to council. So, I can start with some basic parameters in terms of what you've already evaluated, right? All of those types of things, the tours, we can document all that kind of stuff. If you're in agreement with, generally speaking, at least for now, the service center, the 4 million, right? We can start to put some language in those types of things. This isn't final decisions or anything, this is just merely a draft report. But then it starts to come down to the wire. So the council meets July 1st and July 15th. So you are gonna have to present to council either July 1st or July 15th.
Yeah, June 30th is kind of pushing it.
Now, if you
What-
wanna send
what about
emails,
the
there's nothing wrong with you sending an email to me, and we can, but at some point, you're gonna wanna come together to have conversation about that stuff.
So is the next meeting really looking at the slide 46 and start culling what's in and what's out? That's essentially what it boils down
That's,
to.
that's
What I'm-
essentially what it is, yeah.
If we're gonna come up looking at slide 46, coming up with 26 million dollars.
I can do that through Zoom, I can do
Or not.
days on a Zoom.
Or not, but I don't think that's gonna happen, we need something. But I'm looking at slide 46 at our next meeting, we will look at making this dollar bottom line,
I
26
keep
million.
pushing that one, I can't do it again.
Slice and dice whatever has to happen on on these projects to come up with 26 million. That's our next meeting.
So are all Wednesdays out, or was it just the 25th? So we couldn't do the 18th or the 11th? We couldn't push it into next week?
I just don't know that I'll be back in time on the 18th.
Okay.
I can try, and if
When are you leaving?
we're leaving the 10th. Why don't we do, if everybody else can do the 18th, we're driving, so I'll just,
Can you Zoom?
well, not while I'm driving.
For about 30 seconds or so.
I've seen it.
And I get car sick, so I wouldn't be able to do it anyway.
I've seen it done, Erica.
I know.
Driving with an
I'm not
iPhone right in
doing
your face.
I've done it.
I'll make sure
I'm
that
one
I'm
of the
back by
ones.
the 18th. I might look a little worse for wear. So if everyone else can do the 18th, I'll make it work.
18th,
18th?
18th.
18th.
Not preferable to work.
Is there anything that anybody needs? Because really, at this point, we really are at the point where you take that list and you say, okay, if we're gonna do a bond, this is what we're thinking in terms of the bond, and if we're not gonna do a bond, we're not gonna do a bond, and here's the reasons why, but that's kind of where we're at this point.
At our last meeting, with a smile on your face, if I recall, you were sitting down there, and you had said there was some possibility of finding alternative sources other than a bond if we wanted to go over $26 million. Is
There,
that still a secret, or was that
well,
some thinking?
so essentially what I'm talking about is that for 4 million for the service center, right?
Oh, that was it.
Yeah, that was that, right? Because,
I thought you were talking about borrowing money from the general fund and charging ourselves interest.
well, that's, so we can always get creative and do different things, but essentially, yeah, so. Richard has got a look over there that I'm not even gonna look to my left, so.
That just got recorded too. I didn't say it, Richard. I didn't say it.
So is there anything anybody needs in preparation for the meeting on the 18th, would like to see?
She wants her.
Yeah, just before we,
Question, should we, in your best judgment, should we work on the high cost for the 26, or look for the low cost or somewhere in between? We have to make a decision on the next meeting on this chart.
I think it's gonna come down to fiscal constraints. My personal opinion is it's going to be difficult, I think, for the taxpayers if we were to borrow $125 million at the absolute most. So I think that is the number. I think you should stay at that number or below. And then whatever projects you can do for that, great. Those that you can't,
But should we pluck from the high side column or the low side column?
The high side, definitely.
Otherwise we'll end up like we did last
Yeah,
time.
we already, and I know this is better, but
well, so ultimately what it's gonna come down to is we're gonna allocate X number of dollars for the project, right? So if you say, okay, just hypothetically, we're gonna do $8 million for the public safety building, okay, it's probably not gonna be as big as what we talked about, right? We're gonna have to scale it back to make that number work. That's essentially the kind of the stuff that we're gonna have to get into once we start in the architecture and engineering of them.
So I just wanna make sure that at the beginning of our next meeting, we're gonna actually go over these pages right here in depth so that we understand what we're asking of people. I just don't feel like we gave this enough time.
On the tax rates. Okay.
That's gonna work, we're gonna ask the most. So my neighbor's gonna go, how much more am I paying? So that's the thing that we're gonna have to defend. Say, no, we're doing what we can, but we need to have the services, it's gonna be X, Y, or Z. I mean, I'm happy to tell them, oh, we gotta pay some more taxes, but I need to know what I'm saying.
Sure. Yep. What I'll do if it helps too is, I'll send you an email with some of the links for some of those documents that we did back at the beginning, and then also explain some of this a little bit more so that you guys can come in with additional questions and stuff. All very good questions.
Are the staff that are here now gonna be at the next one? Yes.
Do our best.
So we can
Do our best.
ask
Yeah.
questions?
Well, I don't want the
No?
chief of police here when I tell him we're
Okay.
cutting his building, so.
Well, neither. I wanted to ask about that hybrid option, if that's something,
Which
the
one?
hybrid option for the police station, if
Option
that's
C?
something that you guys, do you feel like would even work for you guys, because it seems like a lot smaller.
Well, this is what I'll say. I'm a police officer. I understand it, but not to the point of having a educated conversation on 2 years from now, will we outgrow what we have? I have no idea. I really don't. I trust that man sitting at the table to ensure that that doesn't happen. Because we'll hire those 11 officers within 2.5 years. At the rate that we're going right now, within 2 years, as long as he says, go forth, I'll hire those officers quickly. I don't know.
You said that option B was your preference, so, right? Last
I
time?
like now it's simply rendition. I've reached out to our Chiefs Association and talking to other contractors as well to get other renditions of this as well. So this is just something from what I understand, just to show us what it would look like if it was placed out there. Yeah.
The key operative and what we've understood though, is not based on population increase. The city is not, from the 2010 national census to the 2020 national census, we did not grow that much, maybe 1,200 people. So our residential space, put more people on the beds, not that great. So what we're looking at is crime. And that's what Chief said, there's no way to gauge how much more crime the city is going to be having to deal with between now and the next 5, 10 years.
However,
So it's not people, it's crime.
if you look at that, the comprehensive plan survey that they just put out, wanting everybody's opinion, it's all apartments. So if we put that many apartments in our city, we are gonna have a bigger
It's not happening.
population.
I think your city council probably will not be in favor.
I hope so, but everything I saw was apartments.
That's because there's not clear understanding of the impact of apartments on our city. And the number of people that responded to that is such a small portion of the entire city, then you have to look at it statistically, is a true general population in terms of a statistical sample that's gonna be representative of true opinion. The answer to that from an academic and statistical perspective is no.
I agree.
Okay, so the floor has been yielded to me. Has everyone gotten their questions answered as much as possible for this session? Okay, so I will close this meeting at 8:08 in the evening. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next time.